Dad couldn't even hold a pen 6 weeks before he died. So who signed the new will? That was the question that kept echoing in my mind while everyone else seemed ready to move on. My name is Evelyn Harper. I was 68 years old when my father, Richard Harper, passed away. The funeral had ended only a few hours earlier. Family members stood in small groups outside the church, exchanging quiet condolences and promising to stay in touch. The late autumn air in Connecticut carried a chill that settled deep into my bones. I remember watching the last guests leave the parking lot while feeling something I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't grief alone. It was a sense that something wasn't right. My father had spent his final months in a private care facility overlooking a small lake. I visited him every week, sometimes twice. He wasn't a wealthy celebrity or a powerful businessman. He was simply a hardworking man who had built a successful manufacturing company over 4 decades. By the time he passed away, his estate was worth nearly $3 million. That afternoon, our family gathered in a conference room at the law office where my father's affairs were being handled. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Dark wooden shelves lined the walls. Framed certificates hung neatly behind the attorney's desk. My half-brother Brandon sat across from me, unusually relaxed for someone who had just lost a parent. He wore an expensive navy suit and checked his phone more than once while we waited. I try not to judge him. Grief affects people differently. At least that's what I told myself. Then attorney Michael Grant opened a folder and began reading. At first, everything sounded normal. A few charitable donations, several personal gifts, family keepsakes. Then the numbers started appearing. Large numbers. The manufacturing company, the investment accounts, the lake property. Nearly everything was being left to Brandon. I sat perfectly still as the words washed over me. My share amounted to a modest amount that felt almost symbolic compared to the rest of the estate. For a moment, I wondered if I had misunderstood. My father had always treated us fairly. He believed family disputes over money destroyed people. He had said that more than once. Yet according to the document being read, he had decided to leave almost everything to one son and almost nothing to his daughter. I looked down at the copy placed in front of me. My eyes moved slowly across the pages until they stopped at a sentence near the end. The document had been revised 6 weeks before my father's death. Michael cleared his throat and added a detail that made my stomach tighten. Your father personally approved these revisions during a private meeting. Brandon nodded immediately, almost too quickly. That sounds like Dad, he said. I didn't answer. 6 weeks before his death, my father could barely lift a coffee mug without assistance. I remembered helping him hold a birthday card for his youngest grandson because his hands shook so badly. I remembered him laughing sadly when the pen slipped from his fingers. Most of all, I remembered him saying, "Looks like my signature isn't what it used to be." My eyes drifted to the signature at the bottom of the will. It looked smooth, confident, perfect, more perfect than it had looked in years. Around me, the meeting continued. People spoke, papers moved, chairs shifted, but I heard almost none of it. I kept staring at that signature. By the time we walked out of the law office, the sun was beginning to set behind the trees. Brandon seemed pleased. The attorney seemed satisfied. Everyone appeared ready to accept what had happened. Everyone except me. Because as I stood alone in the parking lot holding that copy of the will, one thought became impossible to ignore. Something about that document felt wrong. The drive home felt longer than usual that evening. The roads were familiar, the same winding Connecticut streets I had traveled for years, yet everything seemed different. My father was gone. The funeral was over. The will had been read. And for the first time in my life, I felt like a stranger in my own family. I pulled into my driveway, just as the last light disappeared from the sky. My small white colonial house sat quietly beneath a row of maple trees whose leaves had already begun to fall. It was not a large home, but it was mine. I had lived there alone since retiring from teaching 6 years earlier. Normally, the silence comforted me. That night, it felt heavier. I placed the copy of the will on my kitchen table and stared at it while the coffee maker hummed in the background. I told myself I was being emotional. Grief can make people suspicious. Grief can make ordinary events feel wrong. But the more I tried to dismiss my concerns, the more they returned. My father had always been careful with paperwork. He believed details mattered. He kept records of everything. Tax documents from 20 years ago, property records, insurance statements. If he changed something important, he discussed it openly. That was who he was. Yet nobody had mentioned these revisions until after his death. Not once. The next morning, I found myself thinking about Brandon. My half-brother and I shared the same father, but had very different lives. Growing up, we were never particularly close. There was no dramatic feud, no major argument. We simply moved through life in separate directions. I became a teacher. Brandon chased business opportunities. Sometimes they worked. Sometimes they did not. What never changed was his fascination with money. My father used to joke that Brandon could spot a dollar bill from a mile away. At the time, we laughed. Looking back, I was not so sure it was a joke. As I poured myself another cup of coffee, memories began surfacing. Small things, things I had ignored. During the final year of my father's life, Brandon suddenly became much more involved. He started attending appointments, managing paperwork, answering questions before my father could. At the time, it seemed helpful. My father was aging. Someone needed to assist him. But now those memories felt different. I remembered visiting the care facility one afternoon and finding Brandon carrying several folders out of my father's room. When I asked what they were, he smiled and said they were insurance documents. I never questioned him. Another memory followed. 3 months before my father's death, I had suggested reviewing his estate plans together. My father opened his mouth to answer, but Brandon interrupted and changed the subject. It happened so smoothly that I barely noticed. Now I wondered why. I walked into my home office and opened a storage cabinet where I kept family records. Inside were old birthday cards, letters, photographs, and several documents my father had shared over the years. I spent hours sorting through them. Most were exactly what I expected. Then I found an anniversary card my father had sent me less than a year before his death. I froze. The signature was shaky, uneven. The handwriting wandered slightly across the page. It looked nothing like the perfect signature on the new will. I placed both documents side by side on my desk. One reflected the physical reality I had witnessed during my father's final months. The other looked like it belonged to a much younger man. For several minutes I simply sat there. The house was silent except for the ticking of a wall clock. Finally, I picked up my phone and looked at the business card Michael Grant had handed me after the reading. I was not ready to make accusations. I was not even sure what I believed. But I knew one thing. Before I accepted what happened, I needed answers. And somewhere inside that stack of paperwork, the truth was waiting. The following morning, I called Michael Grant's office and asked for a complete copy of every document related to the revised will. I kept my voice calm. Years of teaching had taught me that emotions rarely helped when facts were needed. Michael sounded polite, but slightly surprised by my request. He assured me that everything had been handled properly and that the records would be available for review. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat at my kitchen table and looked out the window at the bare maple branches swaying in the cold wind. My father used to say that the truth always leaves fingerprints. The challenge was knowing where to look. 2 days later, I drove to the law office and picked up a thick folder. The receptionist handed it to me with a professional smile. Nothing seemed unusual. Yet the moment I returned home and began reading, small details started catching my attention. Most people would probably have overlooked them. Dates, notes, signatures, appointment records. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they felt strange. According to the file, the meeting where my father approved the revisions had taken place on a Thursday afternoon. I immediately reached for my calendar. That Thursday stood out because I had visited him that morning. I remembered it clearly. The facility had been preparing for a holiday event. Volunteers were decorating the common room. My father had spent most of our visits sitting in his favorite chair near the window overlooking the lake. He seemed tired that day, more tired than usual. The idea of him traveling across town for a private legal meeting only hours later did not make sense. I kept reading. The documents indicated that Brandon had coordinated much of the communication regarding the revisions. Again, that might have been completely innocent. Family members often help aging parents. Still, a question continued to bother me. Why had my father never mentioned any of it? We spoke regularly. Not once had he hinted that he intended to dramatically change his estate plan. By evening, my dining room table was covered with papers. Old letters, medical appointment summaries, birthday cards, notes my father had written over the years. I began comparing signatures. At first, I felt foolish. I was not a handwriting expert. But even without special training, the differences seemed impossible to ignore. My father's later signatures were shaky. Some letters leaned. Others drifted above the line. The signature on the revised will appeared steady and controlled. It looked more like the signature he used 15 years earlier. I stared at the pages until my eyes grew tired. Then I noticed something else. One witness listed on the revised will was a name I did not recognize. That struck me immediately. My father trusted very few people outside the family. If he had signed an important legal document, I would have expected familiar names. Friends, longtime associates, someone from the care facility. Instead, there was a stranger. I searched through the folder again, hoping to find additional information. There was none, just a name and a signature. Late that night, I finally pushed the documents aside and walked into the kitchen. The house was quiet. The refrigerator hummed softly in the background. I poured myself a glass of water and stood there thinking. Until then, my doubts had been based mostly on instinct and memories. Now they were becoming something else. Questions were turning into inconsistencies. Inconsistencies were turning into leads. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt certain of one thing. If I wanted answers, I needed to stop looking at the will itself and start looking at the people who helped create it. The next morning, I began with the only person whose name appeared repeatedly throughout the paperwork, but who had never actually spoken during the process. Sarah Bennett. According to the documents, she had served as a legal assistant in Michael Grant's office for nearly 12 years. Her initials appeared on scheduling records, document logs, and correspondence entries connected to my father's file. She was not a decision maker, but people in support roles often notice details others overlook. I called the office and asked if she would be willing to answer a few questions. To my surprise, she agreed. We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop a few miles from downtown. The place was quiet, with soft music playing through hidden speakers and only a handful of customers scattered around the room. Sarah arrived exactly on time. She looked professional but nervous. After exchanging a few polite greetings, I explained why I wanted to talk. I did not accuse anyone of anything. I simply told her that some details about the revised will did not make sense to me. For several seconds, she stirred her coffee without speaking. Then she glanced around the room as if making sure nobody was listening. I cannot discuss privileged legal matters, she said carefully. I understand, I replied. I am only trying to understand what happened. Sarah nodded slowly. Then she said something that immediately caught my attention. Your father's case was unusual. The words hung in the air between us. I asked what she meant. She hesitated before answering. Most clients who revise major estate documents meet directly with the attorney more than once. Your father did not. My heart skipped slightly. Are you saying he was never there? I asked. I am saying I personally never saw him in the office during the revision process. She chose each word with obvious caution. That single statement created more questions than answers. The official file indicated that my father had personally approved substantial changes. Yet someone who worked inside the office had never actually seen him participate. Sarah quickly added that she was not claiming wrongdoing. There could be explanations. Meetings could occur elsewhere. Documents could be delivered through representatives. Still, the uncertainty remained. Then another detail emerged. Brandon had been the primary point of contact throughout the process. Phone calls, document transfers, scheduling discussions. Nearly everything flowed through him. Again, none of that proved anything, but it reinforced a pattern I was beginning to notice. My father seemed strangely absent from decisions supposedly made by him. We talked for another 20 minutes. Sarah remained careful, but her discomfort was becoming impossible to miss. Finally, as we prepared to leave, she stopped and looked directly at me. There was one thing that always bothered me, she admitted quietly. The witness information arrived later than usual. I asked what that meant. She explained that witness documentation normally accompanied the original paperwork. In this case, part of it appeared afterward. Administrative corrections happen all the time, she said, but something about the timing had never felt right. My pulse quickened. It was not evidence. Not yet, but it was another crack, another inconsistency, another reason to keep digging. After we parted ways, I sat alone in my car for several minutes replaying every word she had said. The autumn sunlight reflected across the windshield while people moved along the sidewalk, carrying shopping bags and cups of coffee, completely unaware that my entire understanding of my father's final wishes might be unraveling piece by piece. When I returned home, I opened the file again and focused on the witness section. This time I was not simply reading names. I was looking for connections. And before the evening was over, I discovered something that made my stomach tighten. One of the witnesses had received a payment shortly after the will was revised. For the next several days, I followed every lead I could find. Retirement had given me something valuable that many people underestimated: time. I no longer had classes to teach or schedules to manage. If a question needed answering, I could spend an entire day searching for it. The witness name from the will stayed in my thoughts constantly. I began researching public records, business filings, and anything else that might reveal a connection. At first, I found nothing unusual. Then a pattern emerged. The witness was connected to a small consulting company that had received a substantial payment shortly after the estate revisions were completed. On its own, that might have meant nothing. Businesses receive payments every day, but the timing bothered me. The payment had occurred less than 2 weeks after the revised documents were finalized. The amount was large enough to attract attention, large enough that I could not dismiss it as coincidence. I spent an evening organizing everything on my dining room table: notes, dates, names, timelines. I was not trying to prove a theory anymore. I was trying to understand a sequence of events. The more I mapped it out, the more one fact stood out. Brandon seemed to be present at every important point. Communication flowed through him. Documents passed through him. Meetings were arranged through him. Yet he always remained one step away from direct responsibility. It was almost as if someone had carefully designed a trail that never quite reached its destination. One afternoon, I decided to visit the care facility where my father had spent his final months. The staff remembered me well. I had been there often enough. I sat in the same lounge where my father and I used to drink coffee together while looking out over the lake. For a while, I simply watched the water. Then I spoke with a longtime employee named Karen. She had known my father during his entire stay. We talked about ordinary things at first: his favorite meals, the books he liked to read, the way he always thanked the staff by name. Then I casually mentioned the date of the supposed legal meeting. Karen frowned. She immediately walked to a computer terminal and checked the facility records. A few minutes later, she returned carrying a printed schedule. According to the facility logs, my father had attended physical therapy that afternoon. He had remained on the property the entire day. There was no record of him leaving. My heart began beating faster. I asked whether visitors had signed in. Karen checked again. There was one visitor that day: Brandon. Nobody else. I thanked her and left with a copy of the activity report she was legally permitted to provide. As I sat in my car afterward, I stared at the document for several minutes. The official story claimed my father personally approved major revisions during a private meeting. Yet records showed he never left the facility. The discrepancy was impossible to ignore. That evening, I reviewed everything again: the witness payment, the missing meeting, the unusual paperwork, the delayed witness information. Each piece by itself could perhaps be explained. Together, they formed something much harder to dismiss. For the first time, I stopped asking whether something was wrong. Instead, I began asking how far it went. Then, just before midnight, an unexpected email arrived from a private investigator I had contacted earlier in the week. Attached was a report containing information about the witness. As I opened the file and began reading, I realized the payment was only the beginning. I barely slept that night. The investigator's report sat open on my laptop while the digital clock beside my bed crept past midnight and then 1 in the morning. The witness listed on the revised will was not simply a stranger connected to a consulting company. According to the report, he had a prior business relationship with someone much closer to the situation: Brandon. The connection was not obvious at first glance. Different companies, different addresses, different projects over several years. But the pattern was there. Their names appeared together repeatedly in public records. The next morning, I printed every page and spread them across my dining room table. For the first time, I could see a direct line forming between the people involved. It was still not enough to prove anything. Connections alone do not establish wrongdoing, but they raised serious questions about how an independent witness had found his way into my father's estate documents. I contacted the investigator and asked whether he could locate the witness. Later that afternoon, he called back with surprising news. The man had recently moved out of Connecticut. He now lived in a small town several hours away. More importantly, he had become unusually difficult to reach. No public phone number, limited online presence, few recent records. It almost seemed as if he wanted to disappear. That observation stayed with me. People who have done nothing wrong usually do not spend energy avoiding contact. 2 days later, the investigator called again. This time, he sounded more confident. He had managed to identify a local address and believed the witness still lived there. I spent the evening debating what to do. Part of me wanted to leave everything to attorneys and investigators. Another part knew that every answer so far had come because I refused to look away. The following morning, I started my car before sunrise and headed north. The drive took several hours. Autumn had nearly surrendered to winter. Bare trees lined the highways, and gray clouds stretched across the sky. During the trip, I kept thinking about my father, about the values he lived by: honesty, responsibility, accountability. If something had happened to his final wishes, he deserved the truth. The address led me to a modest neighborhood with narrow streets and small houses. Nothing about the area seemed remarkable. I parked across the street and sat quietly for a moment, gathering my thoughts. Then I walked to the front door and knocked. No answer. I waited and knocked again. Still nothing. Just as I turned to leave, the door opened slightly. A man in his 60s looked out cautiously. I introduced myself. The moment I mentioned my father's name, his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. He recognized it. I could see it immediately. For several uncomfortable seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he sighed and opened the door wider. "I have been expecting someone to come eventually," he said quietly. My pulse quickened. We sat at a small kitchen table while afternoon light filtered through the window. He appeared nervous, tired, and older than his years. At first, he spoke carefully, choosing every word with caution. Then he looked down at his hands and said something that changed everything. "There are things about that document that I should have questioned from the beginning." In that moment, I realized I was no longer chasing suspicions. I was finally sitting across from someone who knew what really happened. For nearly an hour, the man spoke in fragments. Some memories came easily. Others seemed difficult to revisit. His name was Thomas Reed. He explained that several years earlier he had worked on consulting projects connected to one of Brandon's business ventures. They were never close friends, but they knew each other well enough to exchange occasional calls. When I asked how he became involved in my father's estate documents, he looked away before answering. That hesitation told me more than his words. Eventually, he admitted that Brandon had approached him unexpectedly. According to Thomas, Brandon described the situation as a routine legal matter involving an elderly parent who wanted privacy. Thomas said he had been told that all necessary approvals had already been obtained. His role, as it was presented to him, was simply administrative. The explanation sounded carefully constructed. Too carefully. As the conversation continued, additional details emerged. Thomas never met my father. Not once. He never sat in a room with him. He never discussed the estate with him. He never witnessed any conversation about revisions. Hearing those admissions felt surreal. The entire purpose of a witness was to verify authenticity. Yet the man sitting across from me had no personal knowledge of the person whose wishes he supposedly confirmed. I asked why he agreed to participate. He sighed heavily and rubbed his forehead. At the time, I trusted what I was told, he said. I did not think I was stepping into anything serious. Then came the detail that explained his uneasiness. Shortly after the paperwork was completed, a payment arrived through a consulting arrangement. Officially, it appeared related to business services, but Thomas admitted the timing had always bothered him. He never directly said the money was connected to the estate documents. He did not need to. The implication hung between us. What affected me most was not anger. It was disappointment. My father spent his entire life teaching that integrity mattered when nobody was watching. Yet here I was, listening to a man describe shortcuts, assumptions, and convenient explanations that had somehow become part of something deeply personal. Before I left, I asked Thomas whether he would be willing to provide a statement if necessary. He remained silent for several seconds. Then he nodded. "If it comes to that, yes," he said quietly. I should have asked more questions from the beginning. The drive home felt different from the drive there. For months after my father's death, I had questioned my own instincts. I wondered whether grief was clouding my judgment. Now those doubts were fading. The facts were beginning to speak for themselves. Over the following weeks, my attorney assembled everything we had gathered: facility records, communication logs, witness statements, payment documentation, Yet one major question remained unresolved. Even if the witness process had been compromised, we still needed to establish what happened to the signature itself. That issue sat at the center of everything. Without it, Brandon could continue arguing that my father had approved the revisions privately. The answer arrived through a forensic document examiner recommended by my attorney. She specialized in handwriting analysis and had testified in numerous estate disputes. After reviewing both the revised will and multiple samples of my father's genuine signatures, she requested additional documents from different periods of his life. We provided everything available. Weeks later, her report arrived. I remember opening the envelope at my kitchen table. The room felt unusually quiet. Outside, the first signs of winter covered the lawn with a thin layer of frost. I began reading slowly. By the second page, my hands had become completely still. Because according to the expert, the signature was not the strongest evidence we had. There was something else hidden inside the document that was far more damaging. The expert's report revealed something none of us had anticipated. The signature raised concerns, but the greater problem involved the document itself. Certain pages showed formatting inconsistencies that should not have existed if the will had been created and executed during a single legal process. Margins differed slightly. Metadata from digital drafts pointed to revisions occurring at times that conflicted with the official timeline. Most importantly, language appearing in one section matched wording taken from a completely different estate document prepared months later for an unrelated client. When my attorney explained the significance, I sat speechless. Documents do not accidentally borrow future language. Someone had assembled portions of the will in a way that contradicted the story Brandon had been telling from the beginning. By early spring, the dispute had moved into formal legal proceedings. Brandon remained confident. Every time I saw him entering a conference room or leaving a meeting, he carried himself as though the outcome had already been decided. He continued insisting that our father had changed his mind during his final months. He portrayed himself as the dutiful son who had simply helped manage paperwork. If I had not spent months gathering evidence, I might have doubted myself again. But now the facts were too numerous to ignore. The hearing took place in a quiet courtroom that felt smaller than I expected. There were no dramatic speeches or emotional outbursts. Real legal disputes rarely resemble television dramas. Instead, everything unfolded through documents, testimony, and careful questioning. My attorney presented the facility records showing that my father never left the care center on the day he supposedly attended a private legal meeting. He introduced communication logs demonstrating Brandon's unusual level of control over the revision process. Then came the witness testimony. Thomas Reed appeared nervous, but he answered honestly. He admitted he had never met my father and could not personally verify the circumstances surrounding the document. Watching him speak, I realized how much his willingness to tell the truth had changed the course of the case. Next came the forensic expert. Her explanation was calm and highly technical. She described the inconsistencies in the signature analysis, then moved to the document construction issues. Even without understanding every detail, it became clear that the official timeline could not be reconciled with the evidence. Several times, Brandon's attorneys attempted to challenge her conclusions. Each time, she calmly referred back to records, dates, and verifiable facts. The turning point arrived when financial records were introduced. The payment connected to the witness relationship was not presented as proof of wrongdoing by itself. Instead, it became another piece of a larger pattern. A pattern showing coordination, unusual timing, and a process that repeatedly bypassed normal safeguards. Throughout the proceedings, I tried not to focus on Brandon, yet occasionally I glanced across the room. The confidence he displayed at the beginning slowly faded. His answers became shorter. His expressions tightened. For the first time, he seemed to understand that the narrative he had relied upon was collapsing under scrutiny. Weeks later, the court issued preliminary findings. The revised document's validity was now in serious doubt. Additional review was ordered, and the original estate plan moved closer to being restored. I remember leaving the courthouse that afternoon and standing on the steps beneath a clear blue sky. For months, I had followed questions that everyone else wanted me to ignore. Now those questions had become answers, but the final decision had not yet arrived. And according to my attorney, the most important ruling was still ahead. The final ruling arrived on a bright morning in early summer. I remember standing by the kitchen window when my attorney called. The maple trees outside were full again, their branches moving gently in the breeze. For a moment, I simply listened as he explained the court's decision. The revised estate document would not be recognized. The evidence had raised too many questions and revealed too many inconsistencies. The original estate plan, the one my father had established before the disputed revisions appeared, would control the distribution of his assets. After months of uncertainty, the matter was finally settled. When the call ended, I remained standing there in silence. I expected to feel excitement, relief, satisfaction. Instead, the emotion that arrived first was sadness, not because of the outcome, but because of everything that had happened to reach it. Families are supposed to come together after a loss. Ours had done the opposite. Somewhere along the way, trust had been replaced by secrecy, and honesty had been replaced by convenience. The legal process concluded over the following weeks. Assets were transferred according to the valid estate plan. The company my father spent decades building remained protected. The properties were distributed properly. The investment accounts were handled according to his documented wishes. Financially, the estate was worth nearly $3 million. On paper, it looked like a significant victory, yet the money itself never felt like the real reward. The real reward was knowing that my father's voice had not been erased. Throughout the process, I often thought about the afternoons we spent together at the lake near the care facility. He would sit by the window and talk about responsibility. He believed that a person's character revealed itself through small decisions long before major ones arrived. At the time, those conversations seemed ordinary. Looking back, they became the foundation that carried me through every challenge that followed. Brandon and I spoke only briefly after the ruling. The conversation was civil but distant. There was nothing left to argue about. The evidence had spoken clearly. Whatever explanations he once relied upon no longer mattered. As he walked away that day, I realized I felt neither anger nor triumph. I simply felt finished. Some chapters end with celebration. Others end with acceptance. This was one of those endings. Several months later, I visited my father's grave on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The cemetery overlooked rolling hills covered in green grass. I placed fresh flowers beside the headstone and sat on a nearby bench. The world felt peaceful again. For the first time since his death, the questions had stopped. The doubts had stopped. The endless searching had stopped. All that remained was memory. Before leaving, I looked at his name engraved in stone and thought about how easily the truth can disappear when people stop asking questions. Then I thought about how resilient the truth can be when someone refuses to give up. I started my car and drove home beneath a clear blue sky. The estate had been restored. The record had been corrected. My father's legacy remained intact. And in the end, that mattered more than any number written on a financial statement. I did not spend months fighting because I wanted a larger inheritance. I fought because the man who raised me deserved honesty. He deserved to have his real wishes respected. And as I drove down the familiar Connecticut roads toward home, I finally understood something that had taken me an entire year to learn. Money can be inherited, property can be transferred, but integrity is the only legacy that truly belongs to the people who earn it.